The patch bay is really the heart of the studio. If you have a lot of outboard gear, processors, EQs, mixers, effects processors, you name it, having a good patch bay setup will make your day so much more efficient, and everything is just smoother with a good patch bay setup. Before I show you how I've set up my patch bays, I want to take you on a little crash tour of how patch bay works and the different ways you can set up a patch bay to suit your workflow. This is a 48-point patch bay. You have 2 rows of 24 patch points each, 1 row at the top and 1 row at the bottom. As you have a front side, you also have a back side on a patch bay, and it's on the back side of the patch bay that you patch in your gear, the gear you have in the studio. Everything you want to be able to connect fast, you hook this up to the back side of the patch bay. So let me take you through a couple of examples. Over here we have a mixer. This is a very old beat up Mackie mixer. It still works and I've used it a lot, and I'll show you this in another video at another time. But this mixer has a couple of inputs and outputs. I'd like to hook these up to the patch bay. So if you remember, we have the front here. This is where we'll patch in things later, but when we hook up gear, we use the back side. And I want to use a couple of the preamps on this mixer. So when I plug in a microphone on channel 1 here, I want the output of that channel to go into the patch bay. So how do I do that? Well, I pick up a cable and I go directly out of the mixer. This is channel 1's direct output. So the output of that preamp comes up here, and I put that into the first patch point at the top row at the back of the patch bay. That means that the output of that preamp is now coming out on this point on the top row here. In patch bay convention, outputs go on the top row and inputs go on the second row, so that the output sort of flows downwards from the top like a flowing stream, a river of water if you want. So outputs is on the top, and this was the direct output from channel 1 on the mixer, so that goes into the back of the patch bay, comes out at this point here. So that means I can, to clarify things a little bit, I can put this sticker on top here, outputs on the top, and inputs at the bottom here. Remember, the microphone goes into the preamp, which is located elsewhere, maybe in the studio. The output goes in at the back, at the top row, comes out at the top row as well. This is the output of the preamp. Okay, let's do the same thing for the second preamp here. The direct out going into at the back of the patch bay, the second point here at the top. So now we have preamp number 1 going out, preamp number 2 coming out, the signal from those preamps on the mixer itself. So far, so good. I also have a 2-channel audio interface hooked up to my computer. I want to record those signals coming out of the mixer. Well, we have the bottom row, which are inputs. So why not put this down here, the audio inputs on the audio interface. So from the input jacks on the audio interface, I take the first channel and put it into the bottom row patch point number 1 here. And here goes that second input jack from the audio interface. So that's channel 1 and 2 on that audio interface. So let's put this down here. So far we've used 4 patch points at the back of the patch bay. 2 of those are from the preamps on the mixer here, flowing out on the top jacks. And at the bottom jacks we have the direct inputs to interface channel 1 and 2. And that means if I now take a patch cable and plug this into the output of the preamp, coming from here through the back of the patch bay, and patch this directly into the input jack here, we now have a flowing connection between the output of the preamp, the microphone in this case, and into the audio interface, channel 1, and I can now record me singing or talking into that microphone if I want to. We have now established a connection through the help of one patch cable. And here is where we'll meet some Patchbay terminology. In the use of Patchbays, you'll often hear words as normaling and half normaling. And what's the difference between the two? This Patchbay here, this is now set up in a so-called normaled way, which means if I unplug these or this patch cable, what comes in at the top row at the back will automatically be wired into what comes in at the bottom here, again at the back of the Patchbay. So everything that comes in here will flow directly to the bottom row without any need for cables. And for us here, it means that the way this is set up now, with only these 4 patch points at the back, I have a signal flowing from the top to the bottom without having to do anything. The same for channel number 2. What comes out of preamp number 2 goes directly to the audio interface without any need for patch cables. And this in itself can be quite flexible, as I'll show you in a minute. Again, this is because this Patchbay is normaled. So now you might think, what happens if I plug something into the top row jack here now? Like I'm doing here. Well, that's the thing. When the Patchbay is in a normal mode, patching something into the top row here will break that connection. Now the signal is not flowing from the top to the bottom. So everything I sing into the microphone now will not be reaching that audio interface because I've patched in that cable, and now the signal is here. I can route this elsewhere. But where would I route it? Well, if I have a compressor, let's hook this up to the Patchbay and see how it goes. So I put that here. Here's that input, and here's the output of the compressor. Let's put that into the Patchbay as well. So I'll take a patch cable and I'll take the input. That's the input of the compressor. And I'll put this into one of the bottom rows at the back here. Remember, bottom rows are inputs. So let's put it into, that's number 12. So at number 12 here, we have the input of the compressor. So let's take the output of the compressor and put that into jack number 13 at the top row. Remember, top rows are outputs, output of the compressor. And let's put that sticker here. So that's the compressor in. And here's the compressor out here. And remember, this Patchbay was in normal mode, meaning the signal from the preamp is now coming out of this jack here because I've broken the connection by inserting this cable. So if I now take this and put this into this jack here, this is now being fed to the compressor. And if I take the output of that compressor, going back to the bottom row, the input of the audio interface, the signal has now been rerouted from the top into the compressor, out of the compressor, and back into the audio interface. And I can do my adjustments here to compress the microphone signals going into the preamp and through this setup in this Patchbay here. This is in normal mode. But let's take it even further. I have another box here. This is a chorus. You've seen this earlier in the video series, as well as the compressor. Let's put that here. Let's hook that up as well. We'll take the input of that and route it to patch point number 17, which is at the bottom row here. So let's put a sticker on there as well. We have chorus in here, and we'll use this as a chorus out, and we'll take the output of that into here. Again, now the signal flows uninterrupted. So if I take the output here, I can go into the chorus here, and I can go out of the chorus here and into the audio interface here. So now we patched in the chorus instead of the compressor. But I could have done this. I could go out of the preamp, into the compressor, out of the compressor, going in to the chorus, going out of the chorus, and going into the interface again. So now I've sent the signal from the preamp into the compressor, out of the compressor, into the chorus, and into the audio interface, all through the help of this Patchbay here. Now, some Patchbays has switches on the top or at the back that lets you choose between a normal or half normal operation. This Patchbay I have here requires me to go into the Patchbays and reverse these vertical stacks of jacks to put it in a half normal operation. So for the sake of the speed of this tutorial segment, let's assume I've now done this, and this is now in a half normal state. Now it operates in a slightly different way than it did before when we had it in a normal state. In half normal states, what happens when you attach or plug in a patch cable in the top row is that you don't break the flow between the top and bottom row. So now the signal will flow as it did before between the top and the bottom row. So the microphone signal will flow to the audio interface even if I've plugged in this patch cable. But the signal is also here now. So in effect, I've created a mult or a split, and this means I can take this signal to somewhere else if I want to. And in this example we've just used, we've recorded or assumed that we've recorded the microphone signal through the compressor and the chorus maybe, going back to the audio interface channel 1. In this case, I don't break the connection, but I still have this signal coming out here. So again, let's go into the compressor here, and let's go out of the compressor here, and now we'll go into the audio interface channel 2 here. So in the DAW I can record one track with no compression and the second track with compression because I've used a Patchbay in a half normal mode. So this is a perfect setup when you want to record a vocalist with and without compression and choose later which take you think sounds the best. With a Patchbay in a half normal mode, you can have the one channel going totally uninterrupted and the second channel can go through the effect boxes you want to use for that recording. So in a normal mode, you break the connection by inserting a patch cable into the top row, and in half normal mode, you make a split by doing exactly the same. There is a third way to use Patchbays as well, and this is probably the way most people use their Patchbays before they know about the more flexible ways of normaling or half normaling. And this is what you'd call a Patchbay through connection, or non-normal or denormal, etc. And not all Patchbays support that, and some does, again with the help of switches at the top or at the back. But this is basically when you just patch in anything on the back here, and you just want a simple through connection by taking that same signal out at the front here and rerouting them everywhere or anywhere you want. This can be very flexible as well, especially if you have a lot of mixers hooked up to the Patchbay. If you're out to buy a Patchbay like this, or many Patchbays, remember that Patchbays come in different forms, sizes and prices as well, depending on what type of studio you run, if it's a commercial studio, if it's a home studio. In home studios, these quarter-inch jack points are the most used ones. But in professional studios, you'll have patch bays based on something called band patches, and at the back you might have to solder your connections as well, so they're permanently hooked up. It all depends on what type of a patch bay you're after and what your studio is all about. In my studio here, I've gone for the more consumer type patch bay like this one, but beware that the patch points, the connections here, are not of the same build quality as a more professional, a more pricey patch bay. So it's all up to you what you need and what you want in the matter. If you check out some random clips or videos from my past, in the background you can always see some sort of patch bay going. And here's another example. Here's the Isla S2400 drum machine, and it has 8 separate outputs. And these outputs I've now routed to this patch bay you see here, which is set up in a half normal mode. So I have 8 jack cables going out of the Isla S2400, going into the top row at the back of this patch bay. That's the outs. And below that I have 8 jacks in the bottom row. Remember, those are ins, and those jacks are routed to the inputs of this ASP880 preamp. This is a 8-channel preamp. So with no patch cables in the front of this patch bay, the outputs of the Isla S2400 is now routed to that 8-channel preamp. No patch cables involved, and the signal flows uninterrupted, as I showed you in the earlier examples. To the right on this patch bay, I also have some output jacks going in the upper row, but these are synths coming from the rack to the right of this patch bay. So each synth's output are routed to the output jacks at the back of this patch bay, and this is only used as a through connection to be able to access the output of the synths. So now I plug in 2 jack cables, and I'm going out of this one synth, and I'm gonna patch this into the half normal patch bay to the left there, to the first 2 jacks at the bottom row. And this will now break the connection, and thus I'll be able to play the synth into the preamps channel 1 and 2 instead of those first 2 drum sounds, which will now be muted because the signal flow will be interrupted. As you can hear, those 2 first sounds, the kick drums, have now disappeared. And instead I can play the synth through that input. So this configuration is a little bit different from what we saw before. Now if you patch into the bottom row of a half normal patch bay, then the signal chain will be broken again, but now I can use that to have another source going into the input through the bottom rows. If I patched into the top row again, the outputs, then that signal going in will be mixed with the one going from before. So if I want to have the synth playing together with those first 2 drum sounds on channel 1 and 2, then I'd patch into the top row of this half-normaled patch bay. So again, depending on the operation, what you want out of the patch bay and your setup, it's crucial to know the difference between a normal patch bay and a half-normal patch bay, and what actually happens whether you patch into the top row or bottom row. I have to admit and give a clear advice about setting up patch bays of 5 or 6 different units. It takes a lot of planning and it's a lot of work, and be prepared to patch and repatch a lot of times during your building of your patch bay setup. It pays off tenfold to be very detailed, set up your patch base with drawings, and really think about how you want your setup to be routed on the patch base themselves. Good planning is crucial here, so well begun is half done. And here's the heart of my system. Pretty much every connection going in and out of the SSL mixers, my effects processors, compressors, preamps, etc. It's all coming up on this patch bay setup here. On the top patch bay, I have the ins and outs of some of my reverb units. I have the inputs of my Presonus 8-channel preamp here, and I have some more effects processors on the right here. On the second one, I have pretty much everything on the SSL mixer, the first one, the main one. I have the master sends, the channel sends, I have the returns, etc. at the bottom, because those are inputs. I have the Golden Age Premiere preamps, the outputs of those coming up here. I have the stereo send cues of the SSL mixers, etc. All on this side. On this side, I have more effects processors and compressors, EQs, etc. On this patch bay, I have the second SSL with the same setup as I had on the first one. And on the right, I have more compression, EQs, etc. And on the bottom row here, I have the synths I have in the rack to the left of this 19-inch rack unit. So these are coming up on the outputs here, so I can patch them into the preamps, etc. in the rack here if I want to do that. So to give you a couple of examples, let's say I want to have this stereo Q1 on the SSL mixer going to the MIDI verb. So what I'll do is I'll patch out from the stereo Q of the SSL mixer. Remember, these are outputs. And these will go into the stereo input of the MIDI verb. And the output of the MIDI verb, again, this is in stereo. Now I'll patch these into 2 channels on the SSL6, or the SSL6 number 2, which I have below here. So I can patch these into input 5 and 6 if I want to. So whenever I adjust the stereo Q on the SSL6er, it'll send its signal to the MIDI verb, and out of the MIDI verb into a couple of free channels, so I can have that in stereo. Likewise, on the SSL6er, I have a master insert, and let's say I want to insert my bus compressor to that SSL6 mixer. The bus compressor is down here. Again, I'll take the sends. Remember, sends are outputs, and I'll patch these into the bus compressor down here, and the output of the bus compressor goes back into the input returns on the SSL. So all I have to do now is press the insert button on the SSL6 mixer, and I have the bus compressor patched in. If I'm singing into one of the Golden Age Premiere preamps, I can take the output of that and plug that into, let's say, the vocal compressor here. I can go out of that and into channel 1 on the SSL mixer if I want to do that. Easy peasy, very fast, very efficient. I can patch anything as I want at any given time. Down here, it's not labeled. I have the output of the Roland JX8P, a stereo out. Now I can take that and plug that into the external input, stereo input of the SSL mixer number 2, if I want to record that or just play that or whatever. So when we're going to start mixing our song in the next video, I'll patch in those effects processors, the compressors, EQs I want before we start in this patch bay, going in and out of the SSL mixers, and the SSL mixers will be fed the separate tracks of the song from the DAW, and we'll be ready to mix the song in a hybrid, sort of digital analog way, in the box and out of the box. And these are the SSL6 mixers we're going to use to mix this song. I've had this set up for a while now, and I like it very much. Very good sound quality, very flexible in routing, and I just love the workflow that these gives me. So as you can see up here, I have the inputs and outputs. I also have some inputs and outputs at the back of the mixers as well, and all the relevant outputs and inputs are fed to those patch bays, so I don't have to reach in here to unplug stuff. I don't have to reach back, etc. It's all coming up on the patch bay, so I can just leave this as it is, and I have full access again through the patch point on the patch bay. So coming up on these faders, we'll eventually have the vocals, the bass, the drums, the synths, etc., and background vocals, guitars, etc., all coming up here. going out on this master fader eventually. I'll have insert points for patching in bus compressors and EQs. I have channel inserts on channel 1 and 2 on each of these mixers as well. So I can patch in more EQ, more compression, etc. from analog outboard if I want to during the mixdown. And each of the 6 mixers has 2 stereo auxiliary sends called stereo cues in the SSL world. And I can use these to send my signal to my stereo reverbs, delays, processors, etc. during mixdown. And everything sounds so clean, so nice, lots of headroom, which we'll go through later when we actually start mixing the song. Above the SSL6 mixers, I have 2 racks of 500 series modules. 3 modules here and 4 modules here. And one of these modules we've used already when we recorded our vocals, and that's the vocal processor here, the Tegler vocal leveler. And I might patch that in later as well to give the vocals a bit more compression if I want to. It sounds very good. Here we have a AMS Neve RMX16 digital reverb, very much used during the first 5-6 years of the 80s. This is a 500 series remake of that. Again, it's from AMS Neve, so it sounds like the original. And this we might use on the vocals as well. I'll take you through how this works shortly. To the right of that, we have a stereo compressor, the X-Compressor 500 from Elysia. I mostly use this on the drums, and I'll patch in my, my compressor here on the drums later when we mix the song. And to the right of that, we have 2 SSL EQs. Again, I'll show you more of this when we start mixing the song, how the parametric EQ here works. And to the right of that, we have a bus compressor, a stereo bus compressor from Stom Audio. Again, this is a clone of the famous SSL bus compressor. This will be patched in on the master stereo out of the mixer when we mix down the song. And to the very left, we have another clone of a famous Pultec EQ. This is from IGS Audio, and this will also be patched in on the master stereo out together with the bus compressor to give the whole mix a little bit of shine when we do the final mix down. And on top of this 500 series rack, we have the Boss CE2 chorus, which we used on the guitar parts, as you remember. And here we have a very nice sounding stereo reverb called the Specular Tempest from GFI. We're not going to use that on this recording, not because it's not suitable, it's very suitable, but I want to use some other authentic 80s hardware reverbs instead of this. So this we'll use in another video at another time. Here are the Golden Age Premiere preamps we used when we recorded the vocals. But above the cassette deck here, we have the Rockman stereo chorus. Again, a very famous classic stereo chorus from the 80s by Rockman. And I'll probably patch this in over the vocals to give the vocals a little bit of a chorus. Let's see how it goes. And I might use it on the guitars as well. I'll probably use one of the auxiliary sends to send some of the signals to this stereo chorus. Very nice sounding, very lush, and very unique in many ways. You don't find many choruses that sound like the Rockman stereo chorus. So I'm excited to use this later. And here we have even more units we're going to use to mix this song. We have the TC2290 digital delay from the mid-80s, very famous, very nice, perfect for the delays, especially on vocals. We have the Lexicon 480L from the late 80s, iconic stereo reverbs on this. We're going to use on the vocals. We have a Roland SRV 2000, which we again might use on the background vocals, maybe the lead vocals as well, and definitely some of the drums. We have a Yamaha Rev 7, which we're going to use as a chorus unit. And these, together with the units from the 500 series rack, will be the backbone of all the effects and processing we're going to use on those tracks that need it during mixdown. So far, we've recorded all the parts on an older DAW system, as you've seen in the previous videos. Now, as we approach the mixing stage, we're going to transfer those parts over to a new computer with a more modern version of Cubase. And to have top-notch converters and as a audio hub now, we're going to use the Antelope Audio with its Orion 32 Plus 32-channel in and out audio interface. So this is the hardware setup I use these days to mix my songs. A Patchbay setup where I have all my analog and digital output gear hooked in for easy access. In the next couple of videos, we'll start up the mix, and I'll take you through all the separate parts, how we'll mix them, how we'll tune them, EQs, compressors, reverb settings, delay settings, choruses, etc. It's going to be so much fun, so see you there. Cheers.